My name is Elias Blackwell, and for 17 years I served as the chief executioner for Newgate Prison, a man whose job it was not to question, not to pray, but simply to ensure that the trapdoor gave way cleanly beneath a man's weight. I kept no family, had no close friends, and lived in a lodging house beside the yard where the gallows loomed like a permanent shadow against the brick. I was paid well enough, drank little, spoke less, and did what was asked of me with a steady hand. But on the night of March 11th, 1844, I began writing in this ledger, not to recount my work, but to confess that something in that prison, something in the very rope I tied, had begun to rot me from the inside out. They never told us to keep records, but I did, quietly, out of fear. Not fear of the men I executed. No, their faces blurred over time, one slack-jawed expression blending into the next, but fear of what I had begun to feel in the moments just after death, standing beneath the beam with the smell of blood and oil still clinging to the air. It started after the execution of Thomas Flint, a horse thief and convicted killer from Bethnal Green, whose eyes did not close when the noose tightened. I remember the thud of the drop, the silence that followed, and then the unmistakable creak of the rope, stretching, not snapping, not breaking, stretching, like it was resisting the weight it had once so easily claimed. That night I recorded something I had never written before. The man was dead. I know this. But something watched from behind his eyes, even after the neck had turned. I did not sleep. I did not eat the next day. And when I passed the scaffold that morning, the rope still hung there, stiff and swaying though there was no wind. The yard was empty, the air cold, but the rope moved. For weeks the feeling worsened. The executions continued. Names I remember only by initials now, and each time the same sick rhythm returned. The drop, the silence, and then the moment after, when the body should have been still, but wasn't. Not visibly, not obviously. But there was a tension, a shift in the air, as if the rope did not just take a life, but stored it. I began writing at night, in this ledger, with the curtains drawn and the candle burning low, not for posterity, not for history, but to convince myself that what I saw had truly happened, because the mind, when left alone too long in the dark, will begin to make bargains, and mine had started whispering something I did not want to hear. That death was no longer the end. And the rope was no longer empty. It was the execution of Elias Cobb that nearly drove me to abandon my post, a man I had never met before the sentencing, yet whose name seemed to echo against the walls long before his boots touched the scaffold. He had been convicted of murdering his employer and wife in a single night, a crime as senseless as it was brutal, and though he never confessed, never pleaded, he carried a look of defiance right up to the very moment I tied the knot behind his left ear. But there was something else that morning, something colder than the air, deeper than the silence. When I placed the sack over his head, I felt his breath catch not in fear, but as if he recognized me. Not as an officer of the Crown, but as something else entirely. The drop was clean. The body twitched, stilled, and by all accounts it was over. The crowd, as usual, began to murmur, some already dispersing with their breakfasts still warm in hand. But I stayed beneath the beam, longer than I should have, eyes fixed on the spot where his heels still swayed inches above the trapdoor. I couldn't move. My knees felt locked, and in the thick silence that followed, I swear, I heard a breath drawn in, a slow, deliberate inhale from beneath the sack. They said I was overwrought, that the pressure of my station had finally begun to chip away at my reason. But when we removed the body, when we laid it out upon the cold stone slab of the post-mortem room, the undertaker found something else that no one could explain. 3 perfect fingernail marks scratched into the inside of the linen sack, fresh, deep, and still slightly bleeding. I wrote none of this in the official register. I signed the death record as expected, filed the time and date, and nodded as the inspector thanked me for a job well done. But that night, in my private ledger, I wrote 14 pages. I wrote them until my candle burned to nothing, until my fingers cramped and my vision swam, because I knew, beyond doubt, that the man had not died when the rope went taut. Or if he had, something else came with him, and that something stayed behind. 2 days later, I returned to the post-mortem chamber to fetch my gloves, and found the slab empty. His body had already been claimed, the attendant said, by a cousin. No record of the cousin existed. No name was left. But what chilled me most was not the missing paperwork, nor the quiet tone in the attendant's voice. It was the faint stain left on the stone, shaped not like blood, but like 2 bare feet, standing. And they pointed toward the door, not the one that led out, but the one that led deeper below, to a part of the prison that no one had walked in decades, and that the living no longer dared to map. The old prison was built like a secret, trying not to be found, its corridors too narrow, its staircases built to turn back on themselves, as if the very architecture warned you not to go where you did not belong. I had known every step of the gallows yard above, every iron hook, every creaking timber, but what lay below, that stone corridor, half swallowed by dust and damp, I had never dared explore until the morning after Elias Cobb's body vanished. The door had no label, no keyhole, just a brass handle dulled by years of breathless avoidance. I had seen it before, once or twice in passing, usually half-shadowed by the coats of the wardens. No one ever spoke of what lay beneath. Foundations, they would say, when asked. Storage. But that morning, when I followed the shape of those bare, red-tinged footprints into the dark, I found no crates, no tools, no remnants of any kind. Only stone, and silence, and the smell. God, the smell. It wasn't the rot of death. I'd grown used to that. This was older, wetter, as if the very walls were exhaling secrets they'd promised never to tell. I walked for what must have been 15 minutes, deeper into the earth. The light of my lantern carving slivers through the black. The further I went, the colder it became. My breath visible in the flickering yellow glow, my knuckles stiff from more than just fear. Then I saw it. A room, square and low-ceilinged, with a single wooden chair at its center. Above it hung a noose, not new, not ceremonial, but frayed and knotted with a hand that had no business tying rope. On the wall behind the chair, a message had been carved into the stone with what looked like fingernails. No ink, no stylus, just grooves, jagged and desperate. The rope remembers every name. I backed away. Slowly, carefully, as if movement itself might wake something I could not see. And as I turned to leave, the flame of my lantern guttered, not from wind, not from lack of oil, but as if some breathless force had sucked the air clean out of the corridor. In that instant, I saw a shadow at the far end of the tunnel, a man or the outline of one, too tall, too still, his feet just hovering above the stone. I did not wait. I ran. I do not remember reaching the surface. I only remember waking in my quarters, boots soaked, coat torn at the sleeve, and the distinct impression that I hadn't come back alone. Something followed me, not in step, but in presence, in weight. It was as though the air itself knew what I had seen, and would never let me forget. And that night, for the first time in 20 years, I could not write. My hand refused. The page stayed blank, and outside my window, something whispered my name. In the days that followed my descent into the corridor beneath the gallows, I found myself changed in ways I could not explain and dared not admit. Not to the wardens, not to the reverend, and certainly not to the reflection in the shaving mirror that I now avoided each morning, like it might show me someone else, entirely. Someone with hands that trembled without cause, and a gaze that lingered too long on empty doorways. I tried to resume my duties as before, preparing the noose, measuring the drop, reciting the name of the condemned in a voice firm enough to satisfy the law. But the silence in the prison had deepened, like something beneath the stones was now listening to every word I spoke, weighing them as if they were confessions. Then one morning I found the rope had been replaced, not by the wardens, not by me. It was older than the one we'd used, heavier, soaked in something dark that had long since dried and tied in the same backward loop I had seen in the chair below. No one acknowledged it. No one even seemed to notice. When I asked the quartermaster, he laughed and said no such switch had been ordered. But I knew what I saw, and worse, I knew what it meant. That night, the entries in my diary turned fevered, the ink smeared from the shaking of my hand, my words looping back on themselves, my thoughts breaking like glass. I began dreaming of Elias Cobb, not as a man, but as something suspended, swinging without sound, mouth open in a scream that never reached his eyes. And each time I woke, the rope burns on my own neck grew darker, as though some invisible noose had begun marking me. On the final day, I found the last page. It was not mine, not in my hand, and yet it was in my ledger, tucked between pages I had written in a section I had sealed. It read, "You watched, you remembered, now you swing." There was no date, no signature, but beneath the words was a list of names, every man I had ever hanged, including one I had never spoken aloud. My brother. I dropped the book. I fled to the gallows. The yard was empty. Dusk had fallen. The rope swayed gently, though there was no wind, and for the first time I understood what the ledger had always been. Not a diary. A summons. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk, quill in hand, staring at the rope through the narrow cell window. At midnight, the bell rang once, though no execution had been scheduled, and from the corridor I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy with purpose. They stopped at my door. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. Not missing, not escaped, but claimed. By what, I cannot say. Only that it knows your name, too, now. Only that it waits. So I beg you, do not return to the gallows. Do not look beneath the stone. And above all, never finish the ledger.